we need to work on helping government and the faith sector recognize that this is a crisis, and to fund it and staff it and offer the radical hospitality necessary to treat it as a crisis. And that does involve destigmatizing the LGBT community and mental health and human hygiene and some of the things that turn people off from working with those individuals who live on the street either by choice or circumstance. And we need to, I think, also help congregations recognize that working with the homeless is a ministry, to use a Christian term, of unconditional love and not conditional circumstances, where if you come here, you have to go to Bible study. And if you come here, you have to pray in a Christian way before a meal. And some of the things that some congregations engage in, which keep people from coming to them for help because they don't want to experience that. And I was very excited to hear Clint talk about the LGBT interest that he has, because there are, despite what we offer, we don't have any stabilization bed sites that are open to the trans community, or any stabilization sites that are serving halal food. So, we have to look at the needs that exist in unique populations within the homeless community and find either the stabilization bed opportunities or the respite bed opportunities to meet the needs of those individuals 365 days a year, not when it's convenient, not when you sort of can devote your space one night a week, but in a way that consistently meets their needs and puts them in relationship with the caregivers that congregations have, either professionally or as volunteers, to support these kinds of sheltering programs. So, I could go on for hours, but that's a snapshot of why we do what we do and what we're trying to do to kind of shift the way it's being done.
Great. That's super helpful. We've got Peter and Adama, and I'm sorry, Marc. Can people hear me? Yeah. We've got Marc and Adama, and then so I hope we'll get a moment on the proposal you have to the current administration, Marc, and then maybe a picture of some of the needs of migrants and all the work that you've been doing also at Port Authority. But let's try to do 5 minutes each, and then we can we'll open it up to questions as well. Marc.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, thank you, Peter, for laying this out so well. I guess the question is, for our theme today is, for this workshop, best practices. I just want to suggest that we really, as congregations, as people of faith, we need to look at short-term, medium-term, and long-term. As Isaac has said, we need to find a way to reduce as my dear friend Bernie Glassman would say, reduce the distance between ourselves and those who are struggling. And one way to do that is by providing emergency services, direct services, so we can develop relationships. We want to really encourage that, because that's how we understand our brothers and sisters. And we need to find every way to do that. And so our congregate members will then develop those relationships and break down those barriers. And many things come from that, interpersonally and institutionally. Second thing we need to do, as Isaac has mentioned, is to figure out what we can do as congregation spaces to provide services. There's a lot we can do, and I encourage everybody, I don't want to give Isaac too much work, to come and make an appointment and visit Broadway Community. What they do is incredible. It's such a wonderful space, and it's used so beautifully. In addition to the stabilization bed program that Isaac and Peter and I have been talking about, trying to get the city to provide resources to open many more of them. I mean, we could have 100 of them. They could serve between 15 and 18 and 19 people a night. It's not 24 hours, or some are, but this would be a way of providing opportunities for people on the street and are frightened to go into a congregate shelter, a way to be part of a community. So we need to really take a look at what do we do as congregations with our space. And then we need to take a look at what do we do as congregations to encourage our communities to welcome these kinds of programs. We do have a voice and to say this program is a good program, we want to support it, we want to make sure that it's the right kind of program, but this is what we deserve, this is what we need in our community. So I think those three levels are really important to look at: the direct personal, the institutional in our space and in our neighborhood. And then, as we mentioned earlier with Peter Cook, we need to be aware of the legislative initiatives that are out there, whether it be making vouchers easier to use, whether it be making it easier to create accessory dwelling spaces, whether it be providing more support so that people don't lose their homes by making sure they have an attorney in housing court. We need to become aware of these options. And I always like to quote, it was Pasteur who said, "Fortune favors the prepared mind." If you can be aware of what's out there, you know when you can take action. So, for example, we've heard that the state is taking a look at this voucher, the state voucher, HVAC, housing. I forget anyway, state voucher, which is much less restrictive. Right now, the city vouchers require that you're in a shelter and that you work a certain amount of hours. There are people who are at risk of homelessness who need just a little bit of help to be able to pay the rent, and this state voucher would provide that. And let me just say at another level, Richie Torres, a great congressman, has been promoting for years the idea of a federal voucher system, where people can have that gap between their income and their rent covered. And we know that when people are in housing, they are much more productive. When people are in a shelter on the street, they're just struggling to survive. It's not good for any of us. In fact, there's a book about a man who was in Seattle, I think, called The $1 Million Man. He was spending so much time in hospitals and emergency rooms, it cost us $1 million in a year. Now, put him in housing, it costs us almost less, and then he can be productive. So I think we need to look at those three levels, or four: interpersonal, institutional, community, and then systemic, looking at policies and how we can advocate for the right ones.
Thank you so much. That's terrific. And actually, before I call on Adama, I want to see, we were joined by Lincoln. Lincoln's Otter. Do we know who Lincoln's Otter is? Hello.
So it may be a recording device, because I think Otter.ai is a recording device. I'm not sure who's behind it, but I think that's
who it is. Okay. Okay, so Adama, you have been at Port Authority. You have a unique perspective on what is happening specifically with migrants, and I wonder if you could share a little bit about also addressing, Peter's question about the work the houses of worship have been doing that perhaps just isn't, as perhaps even well known, and certainly not well resourced. And perhaps you could speak a little bit about that and what some of the needs, what you've been doing, and then what you see as some of the needs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adama. I'm also a former asylee from Guinea-Conakry. So a lot of the challenges as these migrants are facing, I've already faced. So it was very important when I heard about these buses for me to be on the ground and support. As you can see, I'm in Port Authority right now, and we have about 200 people that are coming back about shelter issue. Houses of worship have been doing what the city is supposed to do. Houses of worship, not just in New York City, around the country. So I'll give you an example with the Black migrants. Black migrants have been discriminated during this process. So when they're released, when they're caught at the border, they are then put in another detention center. So they're held longer. They're there for 6 months to a year. When they are released, they have to pay a bond or they have to wear an ankle bracelet. For Hispanic migrants or migrants coming from South America, they don't have that issue. But the Black migrants, once they're released from the detention center, they're just dropping them off at the streets. It's houses of worship that have been picking them up. There's a church in Louisiana. As soon as they drop them off and they hear, oh, they get a call from a neighbor or somebody, there's migrants hanging around in the bus stop, they pull up in their van and go pick them up. ICE has not been kind to these people. They literally just drop them off anywhere. But one of the biggest problems that we have in this city, not just for the migrants, but for all Americans, is DHS, Department of Homeless Services. Department of Homeless Services have been an issue for years and is one of those systems that have not been in check. So DHS has these policies that are not working for these migrants. I'll give you an example, family dynamics. They're not, a lot of these migrants are crossing over with their mom, not with their moms, with their aunts, cousins, and grandma. But when they show up at DHS, DHS does not recognize them as family. So what do? They take away the child, put them in the ACS system, and put the grandma or aunt in another system. And then they call us crying, and we have to fight and try to justify why they need to stay together. And the excuse that we get, oh, what about trafficking? And we're like, but if ICE released them together, they're not trafficked. If ICE allowed them to come, then no, they're not trafficked. Just explaining the process has been difficult. A lot of the DHS issues that we also see is with the single woman. Single women and single men are having a lot of issues at the shelter because you're placed in with the unhoused who are dealing with mental health issues, and the list goes on. Cultural needs are not even met at these places. Religious needs are not met. I remember when I took a group of African migrants to the shelter, they decided to pray, and then we almost got attacked by the shelter staff because we apparently were blocking the way. But we said, just give us a room and we'll pray. Oh no, for safety reasons, we can't do that. So where are we supposed to pray? Language access. So we have a lot of people coming from indigenous countries right now, especially younger ones. There's no language access. You'll be surprised there are languages that are common in their countries, but in the United States, they're not common. And we have not figured out how to allow people to come in and translate. I know we mentioned the LGBTQ plus community. So within the DHS system, it's the younger age that they cater to, 18 to 21. After 21, you're on your own. So we have a lot of transgender issues that they're being attacked at the shelter. They're being, the horrific stories that I have. I actually have a woman here who was attacked, and she's about 55 years old. And we don't know where to place her. And I have to go back and email DHS and say, hey, what can I do with this lady? So we rely heavily on churches, synagogues, and mosques right now, because that's where we place these people when they have nowhere else to go, when they're kicked out of shelter at 1 a.m. DHS has also been, I don't know why, after being a month in the shelter system, they're transferring you to another shelter. Or for these migrants, every 10 days, they have to recertify. Their status is not going to change anytime soon. So why do they have to recertify every 10 days? And when they recertify, they lose their bed, but they've been in the shelter for 3 months. So when we bring this up to DHS, the same thing that they give us, oh, we don't deny anybody, but I'm outside with 15 people who were just turned down. Oh, we give beds to everybody, but I have pictures and videos of people sleeping on the floor. Oh, we have food, but the food is cold and stale and it does not meet their cultural needs. We have children that have doctors, medical letters, doctors who are ready to testify that are malnourished. How do you justify that they're in a DHS system? We're supposed to take care of them. So a lot of these migrants are running off to the churches because they rely on us. They trust us. They know that we will take care of them. So I am honored to work with all the houses of worship. And I'm glad that you guys all stepped in, because if we don't do this work, no one will do this work. And thank you for helping a lot of these migrants, because they are a reflection of me. I see myself in them. And when I struggled and my family was begging for food, it was the churches that I went to. It was the synagogues that I went to for kosher food. So I remember that, and I'm now passing it down and making sure that this generation gets that.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you a question, Adama? Just in your experience, how the HERC, can you explain about the HERC system, like, and how that interfaces or doesn't interface with DHS?
So the HERC system is actually good. It still has some issues. I actually want to promote that for our unhoused population, because DHS is not the answer. So this humanitarian crisis is the answer. So the HERC situation, they override all the requirements. So a lot of these migrants, they lose their documents or when they're crossing the river, or their documents get taken by ICE. Obviously, they can't prove that they're married, but the HERC system overrides that and doesn't look at that. But the issues that the HERC system has is that whole family dynamic still. They also have the food, the cultural competency, the cultural competency training, the language access, they're getting better at it, but they don't have indigenous languages. There's a lot of tweaks that need to happen, especially with the family dynamic. So we had an instance, 18 and younger cannot be with their family. 18 and older cannot be with their family. We have a family that has a 13-year-old sister, a 23-year-old son, and a single dad who crossed over with them. Because the son is 23 years old, he cannot stay there. We have to send him to a DHS shelter. And they would not override that and allow us to bring them together. The 13-year-old is suffering and she wants to be with her brother. It's been a month now and we have not figured out how to put them together. The excuse that they're giving us is that, oh, he's an adult, he should be on his own. But he's in a whole new country. He doesn't know the language. His father crossed over with him. Their mother is not here. The father is the protector. And then you have a 13-year-old who just went through a traumatic journey, who's like, where's my brother? Her brother carried her through the jungle. And now we have to explain to him why we have to separate them. So the family dynamic is still an issue. The food is still an issue. A lot of the families who are in their hercs right now have doctor's letters from the doctors that are there that they are malnourished. So these are some of just the issues that we have. Education, resources, those are all things that are lacking. And a lot of these families are relying on the churches. There's a church on 86 that has been phenomenal that the families keep telling me about that's not far from their Port Authority. So there's a lot of issues that the HERC has, but it's better modeled than the DHS.
Okay, well, thank you. And we have an opportunity to now pose any questions or embark in a discussion. And most people on this call are doing work that is very much related to the subject of, best practices for houses of worship as they engage in confronting the problem of homelessness. So I would like to invite questions or comments that to be addressed to any or all of the speakers at this time.
Chloe, if I could just respond to Adama's point, because recently I've been fortunate to work with Deputy Mayor, Human Services, Health and Human Services, and the Commissioner. And my sense is that they really want to do the right thing, but they're just so tied up in knots, as Brad Lander was talking about, whatever that term he used, that government often doesn't work well. And it's so hard, as Peter was saying, to get out of its own way. And of course, your point, Adama, is that these people need to be treated as human beings, not as numbers, or not as systems, as not as inconveniences. I don't know how we do that, but I think sometimes we have to kind of drill down and connect with people at the front lines at the city and say, be more human. I mean, and I think you're right. Congregations do this, and then we can be examples to the way the city can. But this is often the problem. The city has such old systems that it's hard for them to change. We have to make them more human.
Thank you, Marc, for that. I think one of the things that I find interesting is that in the city, we're using the city, but in other states, they're using the churches to run the shelters, or NGOs. And I think that's what needs to happen here in New York City. We need to have NGOs or church run these shelter systems because we are connected to that human side. It's not a political thing for us. It's what is the right thing to do.
You're referring to Washington, D.C., I think, where there's the good network. And I wonder, to go back to Peter's question, and Peter, perhaps you could define what is the difference between a respite bed and a stabilization bed. That's one technical question, but also, what does it take to become that? Because I can think of already, several mosques, MCC that's already, doing quite a lot of that work. Are they recognized? Would that be a good, non-Christian Jewish group to be part of the network? Like, what does it actually take to move from a kind of, unofficial housing situation to one that might be able to get reimbursement? So can you address that, Peter? And then perhaps Isaac could as well as the model.
Sure. So respite bed sites traditionally have been congregations that support the city drop-in centers. So if you want a place to stay for the night and there isn't room in another type of shelter, or maybe this is just the way you usually get housed when you want a bed for the night, you go to a city drop-in center and you say you need a bed for the night. and they offer you whatever alternatives they have, including going to a congregation respite bed site. So for the most part, these are churches and synagogues that have maybe 6 to 14 or 15 cots with linens, and the drop-in center picks up the guests with their, their transportation, whatever they have as transportation, delivers them to a respite bed site. They may get a meal or a shower, depending on what that facility offers, and a bed for the night. And in the morning, a van comes and picks them up and brings them back to the drop-in center, where they're supposed to get their services. Stabilization beds is different. You have the same guests every night. You get new guests from time to time, but the guests have a relationship with the stabilization bed staff who are themselves providing wraparound services. So in my humble opinion, it is a much better process than the drop-in center process, because the guest has a relationship to where they're staying, and they're getting the wraparound services with people who know them, rather than someone who sees them once in a while when they show up at the drop-in center. I mean, obviously there's other types of shelters too, but these are just two options that are finding homes in congregations, as well as other facilities.
Yeah, no, so, but what's interesting is then you have to know that a drop-in center exists. I mean, the premise of that, which is different than, because Adama has been picking up people from the airport, or picking people. It's like, how do you enter the system? That's two very radically different ways of entering the system. Because
I also want to remind everyone, in New York City, if you show up at a drop-in center or any kind of homeless service provider agency, and you have a home somewhere else, they will put you on a plane back to where you came from, right? They will only house you if you don't have a place to live. But if you have a home in Puerto Rico, whether or not there was a hurricane in Puerto Rico, they will put you on a plane back to Puerto Rico. They will not put you into the shelter system. So this is a really disgusting policy that the city has to if you have any safe housing somewhere else, they want you to go wherever that housing is. So when people showed up here in New York after Hurricane Maria, unless they could prove their house was destroyed in Puerto Rico, they were told, here's a plane ticket. You have 24 hours to get to the airport, and you go stay with your grandmother in San Juan, but we don't have housing for you here.
Wow, really?
Yeah, this is the city's process for dealing with humanitarian crises is broken or non-existent. And I think, given how liberal New York is supposed to be, its definition of who's a family is disturbingly conservative Bible Belt. You have to be married. You cannot be a brother and sister who've lost everything and have traveled the world together. You can't be domestic partners, you who are unmarried. You get separated and housed separately, and do more damage to you psychologically.
Wow.
Thank you, Peter. And then Isaac, from your perspective as an actual site, are you respite or stabilization beds? What are you, and how did you become that?
So we are a stabilization bed site. We work in collaboration with the Manhattan Outreach Consortium, which provides all outreach and case management services to our guests. But folks are welcome to stay here 7 nights a week, 365 nights a year, until they obtain either another form of transitional housing or permanent housing. We became a stabilization site in 2018. We actually used to be a member of the Emergency Shelter Network. And the pastor of the church Reverend Chris Shelton, is colleagues with Rev. Flora Wilson Bridges at Rendell Memorial Presbyterian Church, and they were the first faith-based stabilization site. So he kind of got wind of, this new opportunity, and that we could sort of build a full-time staffing structure around it, and decided to pursue it. But Broadway Presbyterian and Rendell Memorial remain the two only faith-based stabilization sites in all of Manhattan. And then there's one other in Queens, but I don't even know the name of it.
And the Reverend Terry Troya has 3 that haven't been received any funding from the city since 2020, right?
Yeah, but one of them dropped out already because the process was taking too long, which is another side of the city's failures.
Right. Well, so, okay. Yeah. Go on, Peter.
Okay, I just had a comment and a question. First of all, I think one of the highest priorities that we could have right now is to get the state legislature to pass a housing access voucher program, which is accessible to non-citizens and citizens. It's one of the fastest, most cost-effective ways to get people into permanent housing. It doesn't require more construction of housing. And it would just be really powerful if we could get that passed. There are voucher programs which are available. We are going to talk about that in our seminar next Tuesday, of how congregations can access those vouchers. But my question is to all of you, is if you had blue sky to propose to the city how they would change their policies to make hospitality to all people much better and to permanently house them, what would you say? If you were to write the mayor today and say, okay, this is what you got to change, what would it be?
Adama, do you want to answer that first?
Is it too loud? Can you guys hear me? Or should I step to the side?
We hear you.
We can hear you.
I think having people that are impacted by the system, making those policy changes is the first step I would add. Because a lot of the people who are making these policies about unhoused or being undocumented, we're not at the forefront of the conversation. We are on the ground here at Port Authority. We see what the issues are, but we have not been brought to that table at once to say, hey, this is how the HERC should open up. This is how you should manage it. That's one. 2 is definitely house of worship. We perfected it. You have to get input on house of worship, on how to run the shelter system, and definitely just reforming it. You have to reform it now. We can't wait to a next crisis. So those are just a few ideas that I have.
As with all programs that the government can't run itself, they have to come up with a structure where if they're relying on the faith sector to provide the services they can't, that the faith sector is compensated appropriately, not profitably, but appropriately for providing that service. And it's when you have congregations that are struggling to survive in buildings that they're struggling to maintain, asking them to do one more thing for free is asking them to continue to to fail and not thrive. So if the city needs to use congregations, and it seems that it does, to house the homeless or people experiencing humanitarian crises, it shouldn't still be, here we are 6 months into the asylee crisis, and the city hasn't even figured out that it needs to pay these congregations $20 a night to at least cover electricity and meals. And so it continues to use congregations as suckers to provide services they can't provide, and for them to have to figure out how to do it themselves or just stop doing it, even though they want to keep doing it because they just can't afford it. Some of these things are just simple solutions. The city used to provide free mental health first aid. Now it doesn't. The city has known for years that a lot of the young people on the streets in New York City are outcast LGBTQ plus kids and has done nothing to stop that from happening. So the city knows what the problems are, but it doesn't have solutions. And instead of coming to the nonprofit sector with RFPs to say, we need providers that will help with these solutions, we're left advocating for the city to come up with these programs. And as any of you know, involved in government contracts know, sometimes it takes years to get these contracts in place. I mean, look at Project Hospitality on Staten Island. 3 congregations that have said they're ready to become stabilization beds 2 friggin' years ago, and they still can't even sign the contracts for an existing program with existing funding to get those facilities open. The city's management of homeless services is profoundly broken. And we are months after our meeting with the mayor's office where many of these things were raised, and still Terry still doesn't have her beds. Isaac's been waiting forever just to add 4 beds to an existing stabilization bed site, and that hasn't happened. So I don't know what needs to happen, but this is why people like me get so angry and indignant about being asked our opinion and brought into the room with the mayor. The opinion is shared and still nothing changes. And we're told, just be nice, just be patient. It's absolutely infantilizing to look at the way DHS runs things and to not have the mayor should have snapped his fingers at that meeting and said to DHS, I want a contract with them done by the end of the month. Isaac needs his 4 beds at the end of the month. Why is it taking you years? And we lost a congregation in the process.
Yeah.
I just want to respond because Peter and Isaac and I and Peter Cook have been involved with these conversations with the city. We just had and Chloe, I think you were there as well. We just had 2 major areas came out of a meeting in June, I think. And one was the development of affordable housing on faith property. And just last week, we had this summit with 250 people present looking at that very topic. And then a day later, the mayor came out with his big moonshot plan of developing 500 units of housing over the next 10 years. So I don't think the city is doing nothing, but I think the city has focused on that and now on development of affordable housing, and they have not yet focused on addressing the homeless crisis in the short run. And we need to really push them to do that. It's unacceptable that we haven't gotten those 4 beds, or we haven't got those 2 shelters open, and we need to keep pushing this. I don't think it's a matter of they don't want to do it. I think they're in their own way. But my sense is that they do want to do it, which is different than having administration that doesn't want to do it. So at least
that makes it even worse. They want to do it and they still can't figure out how. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just crazy.
Well, we have to hold them accountable, but at least they say they want to.
Some of our problems with like the asylee housing is a federal issue, right? So the city is being reimbursed by the federal government for like hotel housing and things, but something that, again, FEMA has known for years. And we experienced this because we used emergency hotels under our HUD contractor in Sandy, my agency. If you house a family in a hotel for about 2 months, maybe 3, in New York City, not in Raleigh, North Carolina, you're spending as much money in 2 months, maybe 2.5 to 3 months, as it would to fund a rental apartment for that family for a year. But FEMA does not allow you to use federal disaster hotel housing money on rent. That is a simple Stafford Act reform. And we house, just to put this in perspective, under our HUD-funded program, we housed dozens of families, sometimes for 8 months, 12 months in hotels. We could have rented those families apartments for 5 years with the amount of money that was spent on emergency hotels. the federal government needs to change the way it does disaster and humanitarian housing to give people stable rental housing. And the other thing I'll quickly say is that even when we were working on the Maria housing after Maria, and we're going to see this with asylees, the city's voucher system gives people vouchers that are worth more than they earn. So they use a voucher for housing that costs more money than they'll ever be able to afford to pay. So once the voucher runs out, they're in housing they can't afford to stay in.
Right.
The voucher process should be scaled to your income so that when your voucher runs out, you're able to sustain that housing as a family unit based on the income that you make. And if that means that you have to go into public housing, subsidized housing, then find subsidized housing. But you can't give people a $3,000 a month voucher when the family's never going to earn more than $1,500 a month to pay rent. It's a setup for them failing right out of the housing market as soon as the voucher runs out. And that happened to hundreds and hundreds of families that came here from Puerto Rico. They thought it was amazing. They got emergency priority to get a voucher. They found housing. They went into that housing. And then they were back out on the street before the program even ended, because when the voucher ran out, they couldn't afford to stay in that housing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Stella has a question, and then I do want to also, Peter, it sounds like we should do an online lobby day, and we're going to make Sister Adama she's going to lead the delegation. And
congratulations.
What?
Congratulations, Adama.
Yeah. No, I'm totally serious about this because we'll get this thing passed. Okay, Stella.
First of all, thank you so much for the good work that you guys are doing. I've learned so much from you guys. I just have two quick questions about on housing the migrants. I'm wondering how many congregations are taking migrants right now, and do you guys have a rough number of migrants who are staying at the congregations? I just want to get a general pictures on this. And it seems like the city is offering more family shelters using hotels. Does that help the situation a little bit? Because Adama was mentioning about how families got separated when they enter the shelter systems. And last question is how's the funding situation right now? I know you guys got contract or got reimbursement from the city in general, but at this moment, do we have a specific funding for housing the migrants from the city?
I don't think the city is reimbursing congregations that house migrants. That's not happening.
Absolutely not. Sister, you want to address those questions? Yes, Adama.
So I know so far no house of worship has been compensated by any city officials. Even us as an NGO on the ground, we have not got compensated for all our spending. The Hertz model has been good, but if you honestly ask me, I wouldn't open up a family shelter first. The ones that are suffering most are the LGBTQ community, the single women, and the single men. But the city has been opening this Hertz without including us in the conversation. So I don't know what they're doing next, but I did hear a rumor that they are going to open up another Hertz. Again, the Hertz model is good. I think that's something that we should really consider for the unhoused community, but it's run by a city agency. It should not be run by a city agency. It should be ran by an NGO or houses of worship, because their policies are not really helping these families. I've had them ask, where can I pray? And I've asked her, can they have a place to pray in a hotel? And they're telling me no. So there's a lot of, I can only answer what the families are telling me, but how their systems are working, they're better than DHS. I would say that, but there's still a lot of work and learning that they have to do.
Great. Just to add, I think that it's Sister Adama, would you agree? So that they're basically like MCC, the Imam NYDIS, and then there's a Ghanaian. Isn't there a Ghanaian mosque as well that's taking people?
So the mosque, because Muslims have a history of being discriminated in this country after 9/11. So they're fearful of coming out and saying, hey, we're housing migrants in our house. So there are about, I would say about 12 mosques that are housing migrants in their mosque, but only 3 that are public. Imam Nas is one of them, and MCC is one of them. And Imam Kaba is another one. I just can't remember the name of his mosque. But those are the 3 most public mosques that are housing migrants. There's a huge number of Turkish migrants that are coming. Of course, I can't disclose where they're being housed, but they're being housed in a house of worship. So it's not, the assumption that people have is just South American coming. We have a huge number of Black migrants, a huge number of Eastern European, Afghanis that came through the border. But they're all relying on houses of worship because they know we will go above and beyond and get the language access. We'll go above and beyond and make sure that they get a headscarf. We've had Afghanis who wanted a headscarf and they're wearing hats. And we were able to give that to them by just contacting the local church or the mosque. So like I said, I tip my headscarf to you guys. You guys are leading this, and I'm as I listen to Peter, I'm like, oh my God, I gotta be best friends with Peter. Oh my God, this one, I gotta be best friends with them. Because I feel like I'm venting now about my frustration about what's going on with the system with like-minded people. So thank you.
And then I just want to add, I'm hoping that we have an opportunity, Peter, at the end of August, if there are at least 2 public, mosques that are getting a little support and hopefully could have a bit better capacity, that by August, if the city were to step up in terms of, or just part of the emergency, shelter network, like that would be, a good segue. And I just want to thank everybody because we now have exactly 2 minutes until the next workshop, which you're all more than welcome to stick around and have this conversation again, or you can go somewhere else and talk about something else equally important and rewarding and interesting. So I think that we have to now make this transition. Are there any other final comments? And Gary, encourage people to take each other's email addresses and to be in touch. And you can do that through the chat or the other way you see fit.
I want to raise one other kind of gap community, which is in New York City, unlike San Francisco and Los Angeles, if you live on the street and you have a companion animal, the city will not house you unless that animal gets certified as an emotional support animal. So if you are an individual living on the street with a companion animal, your only, and your primary relationship, if you need to go in for a cold night, you have to give up your animal. And people won't do it. They would rather freeze to death on the street than put their animal in the pound system so they can get a bed for the night. LA and San Francisco by law require all shelters to take all guests with their animal, regardless of whether or not they're a certified animal. If they're aggressive, they have to be caged, crated. But this is a ridiculous policy that New York City also needs to change.
Could I just add very quickly, as we do blue sky with the city here, I really appreciate HPD and others putting out a process to repurpose property for affordable housing, but it has quite a few flaws in what they lay out there, and to please talk to us about how to navigate that. And we do have proposals to the city about how to change those processes. So we just need to kind of keep sticking with that.
And Ecumenical and Interfaith Advocacy Days, February 27th and 28th. Mr. Adama, you have that in your calendar? All right, well, so everyone, for those who've got other workshops to go to, this is the moment to transition. And if you are sticking around as a speaker, please stick around.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
When do we start again?
12:45, 2 minutes ago.
Oh.
Um,
Never mind.
but if you, we can take 2 minutes. Should we take 2 minutes?
No, I was gonna.
Okay.
Hi, Chloe.
Hello, how are you, Brother Clyde?
I'm surviving.
Looking like a Rembrandt painting, by the way. Your lighting is
How
very
about that? I have the overhead light in the office was giving me headaches, so I got a desk lamp from Staples, and it has made all the difference. But it's a little strange. I'm happy with it anyway.
It's perfect.
Yeah, Rembrandt. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dutch master. Okay, so welcome everyone. Here you are at our official name is our best practices and new opportunities for houses of worship and faith-based nonprofits in emergency housing and homelessness. And we are going to be hearing from 3 speakers, or 2.5, or we'll hear from some speakers. And then we'll invite some conversation, and go from there. So I want to perhaps begin again with introductions. Your name and if you an affiliation is really, we'll make these do a quick round, and then we'll get to our speakers. My name is the Reverend Chloe Breyer, and I'm director at the Interfaith Center of New York, and I'm going to call on someone to introduce themselves. I'm going to call on Reverend Clyde Coomerly.
Hi, Ecclesia Ministries of New York, founded to provide actual religious services of a pan-denominational basis for people who are homeless or marginally housed in the city of New York, and active with the Interfaith Center of New York and with the Interfaith Assembly on homelessness and housing, and the Micah Institute when it was operating, and generally active in home and justice issues around the city, the state, and even nationally.
You want to call on someone? Thank you so much.
Sure. Peter.
Which one?
Oh, we have 2. Well, I'm sorry, Peter Gudaitis.
I'll introduce Peter Cook.
Yeah, good.
I'm Peter Gudaitis, and I'm the executive director of New York Disaster Interfaith Services, and we are the, I guess, host agency of the Emergency Shelter Network.
You want to
Peter
call?
Cook.
Okay, I guess I'm next. I'm the other Peter, and I'm executive director, New York State Council of Churches, vice president of the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative of New York, and we work heavily on advocacy at the city, state, and federal level, and help congregations repurpose their property to build affordable housing.
but they're both rocks.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully not in our heads. So it's a
Peter, you want to call on somebody?
sure. Brennan.
Hi there, y'all. I'm Brennan Brink. I am programming assistant at Interfaith Assembly New York, as well as a second-year Master of Divinity student at Union Theological Seminary. I'm very pleased to be here with you all. I would pass it down to Laura.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Bentley, and I work for the Emergency Shelter Network, which is an affiliate of NYDIS, where Peter Gudaitis is my executive director.
And Laura, can you call on someone?
Sure, Marc.
Sure, thanks. I'm Marc Greenberg. I'm the executive director of the Interfaith Assembly on Homelessness and Housing. And with Peter, I'm the president of the Interfaith Affordable Housing Collaborative. Been doing this work for close to 40 years. And what we try to do is help congregations and faith leaders to determine how they can be most effective in addressing homelessness. So we've been doing advocacy from the beginning. We've been helping develop these life skills programs since the 1980s to help homeless people get back on their feet. And again, with Peter, helping congregations most recently to determine if they can build affordable housing on their property. And I'll call on Rose.
Hello, my name is Rose Scott. I'm a member of St. Matthew's AME Community Church of Hollis. My pastor is the pastor, Reverend Dr. Andrea M. Hargett. I am my community liaison. I go out into the community, I get information, I take it back. I work with different politicians and my community civic lead around the corner. I'm also a member of Queen's Power. We're working with the MTA regarding the MTA redesign problem. We're also working with the Department of Transportation regarding dangerous intersection. Also, right now I'm taking a class at Medgar Evers College regarding the Advocacy Academy. My project is, I titled it Shelter Project 91. I'm looking into the turnaround rate of people who get into with the rent stabilization vouchers that are usually for 1 year. They rent these apartments for 1 year and seem like the landlords no longer want to rent to them again. Then it takes additional 6 months for the landlords to get them out of the apartment in housing court. So in court, my project is regarding the voucher the process in New York. And also speaking to, I spoke to some landlords regarding why they don't want to accept the vouchers. Even though, for whatever amount of money they told me the reason why is that the problem is that the tenants do not abide to the lease rent agreement. If the lease says you cannot smoke, you cannot have pets, you cannot do this, it seemed like it doesn't matter once they get inside their homes. I also spoke to tenants. They said that the tenants of these, they used these vouchers. They said they were having problems with the landlord's husbands looking at them, the sons looking at the daughters. So right now I'm trying to find a way with my experiment for college is to how to find a solution for these problems to bring these people together. Because from my research, there are over 60,000 homeless people, but however, there's over 40,000 rent stabilization apartments that the landlords will not let them in for one reason or another. So I'm trying to bring the two groups in together so people can have affordable and safe housing. And again, it's my pleasure to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Do you want to go? So Rosa, we've not heard from you. Rosa Waldron? Or Millette?
This is shocked because I'm in healing mode and the audio wasn't as clear when Ms. Scott was speaking. So I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh, a brief introduction yourself, your an affiliation. That's really it. We're just going around to hear where we are.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Rosa Waldron. I am based in Brooklyn, Central Brooklyn, Catholic parishioner, active in different ways. My parish was previously active in pushing to have the Responsible Banking Act passed. Your vase, Chloe, you're wincing, so it sounds like you can't hear me.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
You can hear me. Okay. So in the past, our parish worked with many others, groups and faiths to pass the Responsible Banking Act, which was a financial tool used to push wayward landlords into creating affordable safe housing and maintaining it. Unfortunately, that got rolled back by the courts. Active in also sustainability issues, because we need to be mindful of those issues as well as we create and maintain affordable housing, whether it's energy, whether it's many other things as well. So that's what we're
Thank you. Thank you, Riz. And I think Millet is the last person.
Yeah, hello everybody, good afternoon. My name is Malit. I am a journalist with Caribbean Life News. I'm based here in Brooklyn. And yeah, I am, I've been here covering the event for my next article, and so it's been very insightful so far. So yeah, I look forward to this panel and hearing what the panelists have to share about the subject.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and everybody, welcome. And what we'll do is we'll have a kind of five or 6 minute presentation from I think our 2 panelists this time, and we'll start Marc and then Peter, and then Peter Cook. Perhaps you could prepare a kind of first respondent question comment, and we'll then open it up to questions. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Thanks, Chloe. And actually, Peter and I were just texting each other about Rose Scott's comment, because we are sponsoring a workshop this coming Tuesday, the 20th, isn't it? At 4 o'clock on vouchers. Peter and I have been working on the voucher issue, specifically on the emergency housing vouchers, which are federal vouchers that the state has been given 7,700 of them. But we're now also going to be focusing on the city FEPS vouchers as well. It'd be great if you could join us. So I want to ask Peter if you could provide the link to the workshop. And let me just another word about that. We've been looking to identify landlords who are willing to accept vouchers, and we're finding, as you have said, that often a resistance is, in addition to the city's very difficult administrative procedures, the problem is that the landlords are very concerned about the tenants trashing their apartment. And so what we're trying to do is to institute some kind of support system so that individuals can work with the voucher tenants as well as the landlords, and make sure that people are responsive to each other's needs, that people are not to be good tenants, not to be good landlords. And we think that adding that little element can make a big difference. So if you could join us, it'd be great to to have you with us. Like Peter, were you able to provide that link?
I just put it in there
in the chat. Yeah, and so everybody welcome to join us. We'll be going from 4 to 5:30 or so. Expect to have hopefully voucher tenants, landlords, advocates, and I think we'll have someone also from the city that's just been sent to me from DSS, who is a person being put forward as their voucher expert. I'm going to try to have a frank conversation with her as well about how do we make this work, because as we know, there are 20,000 city FEPS vouchers outstanding. In some cases, it can take 9 months to 2 years. We just learned about a man who has a voucher for 2 years, still not able to get into an apartment. It's horrendous, because it could go so far to help solve the crisis if we can have the system work. So hope everybody can join us. But let me back up. And so, as I said, I've been doing this work for almost 40 years. And in terms of the frame of the conversation, best practices, I think it's important to look at the potential power of congregations and how we can impact on the issue. And as I said earlier, it's important for people to be aware of the opportunities to make change. So, for example, on the voucher issue, the mayor has come up with a new pilot project where he's looking to, he's identified with Volunteers America, identified 80 units that they manage. And the pilot project would be to identify 80 individuals directly from the street, do intake assessment, and if they're appropriate, move them right into those apartments. And if that can work, that can be expanded. But it's important to know that the city is proposing these opportunities, and for us to be able to weigh in when they're appropriate. So I think one thing I would say is try to be as aware as we can as congregations, so we know what policies we want to push, what we want to advocate for. Again, I think going back to what I said last time, it's important to operate on a number of different levels. One is, as congregations, to provide opportunities for our congregants to connect personally with folks in our neighborhood who are in need. And as Isaac said, best way to do that, one good way to do that is food, emergency food. Everyone needs food, everyone deserves to eat. So if you provide an opportunity for hungry people to come into your congregation, you'll get to know them, and your members will get to know them, and that'll reduce the distance, change the stigma about who these people are. We find that these just people who've had difficult times, and certainly worthy as anyone else of the support that they need. So that's one level. Another level of, in terms of best practices, is to take a look at what you can do at your congregation. How can you use the space more effectively? And what Isaac is doing, as he mentioned, is providing a stabilization bed program where they had one room that is 365 nights a year, a shelter, in his case, for 15 people, the same people every night of the year. It's a safe place for them where they can then, use that as build on that stability to kind of get their lives back together. They have a medical clinic, they have a computer lab. Again, they have the food program. What can your congregation do? Take a look at your capacity and really maximize what you can do for your community. It could be a legal clinic, it could be a medical clinic, it could be counseling, whatever it is. Let's try to do that. Use, as Donna said, an empty building is a sin. And we want to fill our buildings because we have them, and to do the best for our communities. Another level that we really want to look at is our neighborhood. As we know, we need more affordable and supportive housing, and there's often resistance in the neighborhoods to that. We need to be a counter voice to that resistance. And let me just say that the mayor has recently, just last week, proposed 500,000 units of housing over the next 10 years. But that is building on two great successes over the last month. One in the Bronx, a very resistant community that had developed 8 units of affordable housing over 8 years, has now approved a project for 240 affordable units. In Queens, the largest privately owned project in the history of the borough will provide over 2,000 affordable units in Queens. So these are things that can happen, and we need to be able to speak effectively about why they need to happen. And people who are afraid, let's help them get to know that it's not so scary to have neighbors who are, who would really appreciate having a place to live, so we can be advocates in our communities for doing the right thing. And then, as I said, beyond that, we have to be aware of the advocacy opportunities at the city, state, and federal level. So, for example, Peter Cook was mentioning, and Brad Lander was mentioning, the state, the HVA Housing Voucher Opportunity Access Program, the opportunity to create a state voucher that would provide the gap between what people are getting and what people need to get to pay their rent. This is crucial. And there's also an effort at the federal level, Richie Torres has been pushing, to have a federal program that can help people pay their rent and not be homeless. It is much more costly for us to have anyone who's homeless rather than be stably housed and then they can give back. So those, just in a nutshell, those are the things congregations need to take a look at. What can we do as a community, both directly working with homeless people in terms of our building, what can we offer, in terms of our neighborhood, what can we advocate for, and in terms of broader policies, what can we push? Because often making these policies real can affect thousands of people and provide an opportunity for us to be a better city. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Peter Gudaitis, you want to tell us a little bit about the work of NYDIS as it relates to housing and DSN? And we know you're calling in from Puerto Rico, so it could be snatched up by any number of things at any time.
You're muted.
Someday I'll just not stop doing that. ESN, the Emergency Shelter Network, was founded during the Koch administration as a way of supporting the city's need to house people urgently in congregations because the city's shelter capacity at the time was maxed out. To put it in perspective, we had about 90% less homeless individuals then than we do now. So the problem has grown, and yet the number of congregations serving as respite bed sites has diminished. And in anticipation of a question I had to answer on the last panel, an emergency respite bed is a cot, in a sense, in a house of worship that is filled on a nightly basis by one of the city's drop-in centers. So an individual who's seeking shelter for the night goes to a city drop-in center and asks for a bed. And that drop-in center then loads a group of individuals in a van and drives them to a respite bed site where they may get a meal, hot meal, a shower, and a clean bed for the night. And in the morning, they're picked up and brought back to the drop-in center. There are currently just about 38 of these sites around the city. And there's a lot of inconsistency in the program, and it's something that we're trying to change. So most of these sites are not open 7 days a week. Some are, most are not. And we're trying to work with the Department of Homeless Services to move toward a model where they are open 7 nights a week on a consistent basis, and supporting the city drop-in centers with emergency placements for the night. The alternative is stabilization bed sites. There are only 4 of those that are faith-based. And we want to increase that number. Marc is leading, oh, we lost Isaac. Marc is part of a group with me and a few others leading an effort to advocate for the city to put funding behind not only changing the way respite beds are structured and compensated, but also increasing the number of stabilization bed sites. In our experience, that is because stabilization bed sites are ultimately better for the guests. It is a congregation that can house up to 19 individuals, and they get paid $65 a night in exchange for providing certain services like food and casework and mental health care and other wraparound services. So those congregations actually have a consistent relationship with a relatively stable shelter census. They do get new guests, but the turnover is not nightly like it is in the respite beds, which is why those are called emergency shelters versus stabilization. So we're looking for congregations that are interested in doing those things, and hopefully in exchange for the space being well used, the congregation also is able to bring in some income to help the congregation with their own finances and to keep that space open and available to those living on the margins of society in our city. We also want to focus on how we can prevent homelessness. So working with faith leaders to do more to educate them about how to support families with individuals going through mental health crises, and to get them affordable interventions, and that includes addiction. But also how we can work with populations that are not served at all in dedicated shelters, like LGBT, transition age, young people, trans individuals, veterans, and people with unique cultural or dietary needs, like religious vegetarians, or those who keep a halal diet, of which there are no dedicated shelters. So there are gaps in the specialization of shelters available through congregations, but there's also a need to increase capacity in these types of facilities, and to prevent folks from ever getting into that choice or circumstance. And part of this is also working with the city and working with the faith community to destigmatize homelessness. We have to simply accept the fact that our homeless brothers and sisters need our help and our love, no matter where they are and what neighborhood, no matter how posh, and no matter how fabulous, and no matter how much people resist shelters in their community. Homelessness is a crisis that we've created as a city, and it's a crisis we need to solve as a city. It's not a government problem by itself, and the faith sector is one of the few sectors that has the assets and the ability to be a support system in helping address our housing challenges. And obviously for some congregations, something far more significant can be done to develop their property for different types of housing, apart from these kind of congregational shelters, which is where Peter and Marc have devoted a great deal of expertise and time to support. The other thing that we're trying to make sure that we're providing as an organization is the funding and the space that's necessary to support these facilities. So, for instance, we try to secure federal emergency food and shelter grants to help supplement the funding that's available to congregations to provide food to individuals that are sleeping in their facilities or on the doorstep, if that's where they choose to be. And we're also trying to pursue warehousing of supplies that would be available to congregations with things like food, hygiene kits, clothing, and the other kinds of supplies that congregations might not have the space for, but they need to do their work in a compassionate way and in a comprehensive way.
Thank you so much. And just before I turn to Peter as our first respondent, I want to welcome Sister D'Angelo. Very nice to see you, from Sisters of Charity, and Sergey, and I think Mona. It's good to see you. And we are talking about best practices in with faith communities and emergency shelters. So Peter Cook from the New York State Council of Churches, do you want to respond to what you heard, and also perhaps you've got opportunities coming up that you might want to share with folks before we open it to the wider community for questions?
Oh, great. Thanks, Chloe, for this opportunity. And this is such a wonderful conference, and it's just great to have the space to talk together about these really important issues. So maybe the way to respond is I'd like to go back to Brad Lander's framework that he laid out at the beginning and offer a few tweaks on that. First, he talks about prevention, and we as congregants can pay attention to right to counsel legislation statewide that gives people counsel and housing court so that they're not unjustifiably evicted. It is vastly cheaper and more humane to keep people in their homes in the first place than trying to house them once they're evicted. Good cause eviction, to be sure that people are not being evicted from their homes for poor reasons, and good cause would do that. And then, of course, that voucher system, which was talked about here, it's a pretty uneven kind of system, and it needs a lot of improvement, and we need backing from the state, and we really want to weigh in on that. And then the second thing Brad Lander talked about was production. I really commend to you, if you just Google this, the governor's speech to the New York Housing Conference a couple of weeks ago. I'll see if I can put it in the chat. But what she's talking about here is that while we are producing jobs in the state, there's just not enough affordable housing available for those workers. And so we're really looking at an economic crash if we don't start increasing our production, because people are going to Connecticut or New Jersey for their housing that working here, and it is just really misaligned. She also says that we are first in the nation for blocking affordable housing. First in the nation, at resist, like in Westchester and Long Island, they just barely build anything, which is just a recipe for disaster. So we really want people to pay attention to the governor's housing plan and what she rolls out there. It's nice to see the mayor talk about 500,000 more units. But here's the deal, folks. Churches have a lot of property that they can contribute to address this thing, but that property is unavailable for production if they don't know what they're doing. And if they let the state and the city set the table for them, and we have a lot of leverage and power here to solve the production problem, but that property that we own will be dormant unless congregations know what they're doing. And then the final thing I would just say, when he talks about social housing, congregations can be using their property to do all kinds of housing, including social housing. And social housing is one important component of a broad spectrum of affordable housing across the spectrum. So it's not pitting one kind of housing against another. It's really saying that we need to show up at the construction site with all the tools in our toolbox to build all kinds of housing at all levels. And in terms of opportunities coming up, we do have a seminar tomorrow on housing, where we'll be talking to the chair of the Senate Housing Committee, Brian Kavanaugh, among others like Rachel Fee of the New York Housing Conference. It'd be really good to have you all show up for that. The voucher seminar, which we talked about, which will be next Tuesday. And then we have our Ecumenical and Interfaith Advocacy Day coming up on the 27th and 28th. And the focus this year is going to be on affordable housing and immigration together.
Thank you so much, Peter. Can you drop those again into the chat, just so a new group of people gets to see those? And for those who are what let's open it up now to other questions for our panelists, for questions that you had earlier that you didn't get addressed. So let's hear from those of you who have not spoken yet.
I just wanted to say that I encourage everyone to try to tap into the various newsletters that are out there and the various organizations that are out there that both Peters and I all learn from. There's so much that many people know that we don't know, but we can share with others what we do know. And people are very generous with their time and with their expertise. So the New York Housing Conference is a terrific group to connect with. Peter's group and Peter's newsletters have tremendous amount of information. I just shared my newsletter with in the chat. It's just really important to be aware of what's going on. There's a lot happening, and I would suggest that people are aware of what's going on and find your spot. Pick the issue that you think you really want to make happen, and then drill down, get to know allies, and we can make things happen. And as I said earlier, I think this government, the city wants to do the right thing. I frankly think the governor wants to do the right thing. And I think our president wants to do the right thing. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but often it's good to have an ally that you can work with. You can hold them accountable to what they say they want to do, but it means being aware. There's a city and state first read that you can look up. Great opportunity every day to hear about housing and homeless issues. City Limits is a terrific magazine. Just reach out and get to know everything that people are saying, and then again, pick your spots and get engaged.
Sister D'Angelo, can you tell us a little bit about some of the work you may or may not be doing, or I guess if you're doing work in this area at all, and tell us about what the Catholic Church is.
All right, so this is really a challenge, okay? Because I am a Sister of Charity of New York, and a lot of our, so as a congregation, this is very complicated. So I'm only speaking here in my role as Director of Peace, Justice, Integrity of Creation for the Sisters of Charity congregation, the Sisters of Charity of New York. And so, as you know, women religious, we're like, our median age is like 86, all right? But we try to get the word out to a lot of people. So we're very interested in homelessness. So that's why I keep in such close contact with Marc. And, that's part of what I'm trying to do, getting the word out. And I don't know if Marc mentioned that we're putting together a webinar in the end of January, and hopefully we'll get people, especially Catholics, okay, to come and listen about people of faith welcoming persons without homes. But what I want to say is that we're a very complicated organization because we have connections to groups that we founded, but that are separate from us. So I don't know if anyone on this group is aware of the Sisters of Charity Housing Development Corporation. So we actually sponsor a lot of housing and very different housing. So when I say we, that's not the congregation, it's a separate entity. So that we are engaged because we're on the boards and we have some kind of connection in terms of mission and direction. So if anyone has heard of Vincent's Village up in Nanuet and Seton Village up in Nanuet, or multiple, again, it's 202, section 202 on Staten Island in terms of the senior housing, Fox Shelter, 118th Street, which houses temporary shelter for young women with children until they can get permanent housing. Seton House around 118th Street and Lexington Avenue. So we're involved in multiple ways, and we're also very involved in supportive housing, which is a big issue. St. Vincent's Harrison, that has over 1,000 units supportive housing for people facing in rehab, mental health issues and drug rehab. So in that way, our congregation's very, very involved. So I'm on this because of my role as PJIC director. And also, what can I bring back to the president of our congregation, who's very involved in looking at ways that we can continue to be involved in housing. The property that we, Sisters of Charity, have had that we were able to. That's why we have Vincent's Village. That's why we have Seton Village up in Nanuet, because that used to be a childcare agency, St. Agatha's, out of the New York Foundling. Cecilia Housing, that came about because of our involvement with New York Foundling, because that's another place that we're closely connected to. So we do have that group I'm talking about has great expertise because we've been involved in housing since the early 80s. But the question does become, you know, how do we continue to look at this way of housing? And I can go on and on because there's so many different intricacies. So I don't know if this helps or adds more confusion.
Well, no, but it also, it's very helpful. And from an advocacy point of view, you have tremendous authority and experience. And that's exciting because it sounds like a lot of what we're looking for also is, you know, is this advocacy coordination. And I'm just wondering, we probably have time for one more question. I know, Rosa, it sounds like you're not feeling particularly well, but I am curious about if there's anything that struck you or anyone else on the call who hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
No, but there are some thoughts that have out of the box thinking that's crossed my mind, but it requires more fleshing out. So that'll be done offline, and if something comes of it, I will gladly share it, because the faster we transform this issue in our city, the better. So thank you to everyone for your expertise and willingness to share.
Great. And Father Clyde, I also realize, is there, from the perspective of working with people who are both housed and unhoused on a, you know, in a kind of congregational basis, is there anything that you think has been left out of this conversation that you would like to add to?
Yes, but I'm having great trouble getting back to getting to you right now.
You're coming through loud and clear. We can both hear and see.
Okay. In the other workshop that I attended earlier, there was a very specific comment about pardon me, the lack of concern in individual congregations about the issue of homelessness, and the idea that churches, that the pulpit should be open to this idea, and the suggestion that came up was that the pulpit should be open to speakers, pulpit or the pit at least, to speakers who could talk from experience of the experience of homelessness. And I immediately thought about Marc's organization, who for years has provided speakers.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And I know, at least in the earliest, in my latest time, that it hasn't quite been active, but I think that he has a long list of people, and I know many of them personally. And in fact, I was probably the first person to ever use one of those speakers that Marc brought up out of homelessness into a sort of self-actualization.
We're going to get 38 seconds.
and Marc would be more than happy, I am sure, to provide someone to be a speaker